for the New York Times, and Jason Calacanis, of course, Inside.com founder and CEO. Farhad, what is a reasonable scope of discussion about this? And I'm talking about Bitcoin specifically, not the blockchain.
Yeah. I mean, I think he may be right. We probably are talking too much about it. This is a thin, volatile market. Every time we talk about it here, elsewhere, every time it's in the news, it bumps up or bumps down. It's really hard to tell what's going on with Bitcoin recently. I mean, I'm not allowed to invest in Bitcoin, but I was pretty optimistic about it a couple months ago. But it turns out everyone was optimistic about it then. It's since pulled back a lot. It's really hard to tell what's going to happen with all these regulatory changes around the world. It looks like it's in for a moment, 6-7 months or so, where people try to figure out what governments are going to do, what banks are going to do, and then maybe it'll take off or maybe it won't. But I do think it's kind of an uncertain moment at this point.
Jason, I don't think we're talking about Bitcoin too much, particularly if we're critical and if we're trying to educate the viewer. I know that you've been critical of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. People are talking about them a lot. I think a lot of people have the potential to get hurt. You agree?
Yeah, 100%. Cryptocurrency is a real technology. It's fascinating. It's got the potential to do some amazing things, but we're talking about an unregulated, highly manipulated, and anonymous global stock market. And if you look at the highly regulated stock market, yeah, exactly. And if you look at the highly regulated stock market here in the United States, we constantly have the SEC taking action, giving warnings. With Bitcoin, it's highly, highly manipulated, and there are many, many bad actors who have come into the space. And it's going to be regulated in a very significant way. And there's a very significant, I would say maybe a third chance that Bitcoin goes to zero. Now, that doesn't mean that people can't have fun. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's completely possible.
What would it take to take Bitcoin to zero? Because that sounds outrageous to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it lost half its value in the last 30 days. So it's quite possible that another technology comes along that's faster, cheaper, and if people start realizing that Bitcoin is incredibly manipulated and that the run-up from $150 to $1,000 was created by manipulation, which one report put out recently, if they find out that the people who are early speculators on Bitcoin, and I believe this is the case, created thousands, tens of thousands of wallets and manufactured the volume. I believe that a large percentage of the volume of Bitcoin is actually manufactured and manipulated, which means people who are buying into this are buying into what is essentially a huge fraud. And that doesn't mean cryptocurrency and the underlying technology is not real. It started with great intent, but it's been filled with scammers and criminal elements that are now pumping and dumping these currencies and manipulating them. And people are going to lose their money. If you're interested in doing this, my advice to a family member or a friend would be spend 50% of your time, invest 50% of your time learning about it and 1% of your net worth. What's happening right now is extremely dangerous and clearly a bubble. People are investing 50% of their net worth and 1% of their time. That is a recipe for disaster. A lot of the people who are putting money into Bitcoin don't have much in terms of net worth to begin with. Farhad, yeah, it's sad.
You say that you're not allowed to invest in Bitcoin. How do you think the so-called wise people in the financial business are doing, actually educating people and talking about Bitcoin? And I know, Farhad, as a columnist, that's part of your job.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that a lot of people, including people in the media, including people on Wall Street, sort of fundamentally don't understand this market. And a lot of it might be because of what Jason was saying, right? It's manipulated. It is not sort of, it's mostly secret. We don't really know what's happening in that market. And so there's a lot of commentary around it, but it's hard to kind of get at the, you do have to spend kind of 50% of your time, I think, trying to understand this market. I mean, and as to what Jason was saying, I mean, I think it's totally possible. We see this in technology all the time. There's a technology, this is built on sort of network effects. Everyone's bought into Bitcoin, but people buy out of technologies all the time. It happened to, MySpace and BlackBerry and any other thing you can think of. Things seem unstoppable for a while and then they don't. So it's easy for me to see that it could go to zero, and some other crypto technology or some other financial advance could come along and, beat it out.
Yeah, first strike advantage in technology has its challenges, as we've seen repeatedly, as you note, Farhad. Guys, stay there for a second. We got some news out of the EU this morning. Authorities there delivering this big fine to Qualcomm. It's a big story. Josh Lipton's watching it in San Francisco. Hey, Josh.
Carl, EU authorities nailing Qualcomm with a $1.2 billion fine. The European Commission says Qualcomm prevented rivals from competing in the market by making a deal with Apple. Specifically, that Qualcomm paid billions of dollars to the iPhone maker between 2011 and 2016 so that Apple would exclusively use Qualcomm's chipsets in its iPhones and iPads. EU antitrust chief Marguerite Vestager weighing in on the fine.
Its illegal behavior denied customers and other companies the benefit of effective competition, namely more choice, more innovation, and this in a sector where there is a huge not only demand, but also potential for innovation.
Qualcomm hitting right back, though, saying Qualcomm strongly disagrees with the decision and will immediately appeal it to the General Court of the European Union. The chip giant emphasizing that the decision does not relate to its licensing business and has no impact on ongoing operations. Still, this news, of course, coming just as Qualcomm is trying to fend off a hostile takeover from Broadcom's Hock Tan. Bernstein's Stacey Rasgon says this fine really speaks to a central wedge issue in that fight, in that Qualcomm believes they are in this temporary storm of customer and regulatory issues. Broadcom countering that critical changes to Qualcomm's business model and practices are now needed, with regulators clearly unhappy with the current state of affairs.
Going on Qualcomm, right. Why is that?
It was weird. Jason, is this instructive or not? Is it a sign of European overreach or something bigger?
Yeah, the EU is going to be the finer filter on American companies. We've seen that with Google. And I think the repatriation is a huge win for Trump, because now that we get that money back, there's going to be less of a chance for the EU to retrade a lot of those overseas capital. But I think the bigger issue is the anti-big tech that we've been talking about. And that really surrounds one company, Facebook, and to a lesser extent, Twitter, and the manipulation of the election potentially and the addictive nature of these. Now, Benioff is being a little hyperbolic with the cigarette analogy. I don't think social media is going to take 5 or 10 years off people's lives. And if the Democrats had won, I don't think they'd have any problem with Facebook or Twitter. But they lost, so they're a little bit bitter about that. The big issue is, can Facebook now regulate itself? And if you look globally, South Korea is a really great example of how they've regulated social media. If you want to open a social media account, essentially the equivalent of a Facebook or a Twitter page, you have to put in your social security number. And it's interesting, you know, South Korea is also a place that is the second market for cryptocurrency currently. It's a big craze over there, and they're starting to regulate cryptocurrency. Yeah. We could see that level of regulation come to the United States, but I think Facebook will cut the regulators off at the pass, and you'll see them, you know, knowing their buyer on the ad side of the business, and you're going to see them tightening up like they have been, the ability to manipulate the feed and manipulate people. A really easy regulation for Apple and for Facebook would be to just give people a feedback loop. Hey, you've been on your phone for 2 hours today. You've been on Facebook for an hour today. Do you want to set a limit for yourself? Do you want to actually self-regulate? And those kind of tools, I think, is what we'll see this year as a way to defend against regulation from the government of, you know, how you use your smart device. Because it's obviously not the same as lung cancer.
Right. I'm not, yeah, I think Benioff's comments probably got taken a little bit more seriously than he meant, but that's for you to decide after hearing them. Farhad, Jason, we went almost 20 minutes. We're going to have to cut it short there. Thanks very much for your time. Farhad Manjoo, Jason Calacanis. When we come back, more on GE's quarter. The stock started the morning in the green, but is slipping as we lose some of this rally. Dow's now